Find your places, find a book, page 281. Stand with me if you would, please. Page 281, Jesus Saves. We have heard the joyful sound. Jesus Saves. Find your book, find a place, 281, Jesus Saves. On the first, lift it together with me. We have heard the joyful sound. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Spread the tidings all around. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Bear the news to every land. Climb the steeps and cross the waves. Onward 'tis our Lord's command. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Wafted on the rolling tide, Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Tell to sinners far and wide, Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Sing ye islands of the sea, echo back the ocean caves. Earth shall keep her jubilee. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. One by one, place, turn around, fellowship, shake hands with those around you. On the last verse, join with me, give the winds a mighty voice. On the last verse. Sing on the fourth verse while you find your seats. Maybe not. We'll wait. Give the winds. Give the winds a mighty voice. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Let the nations now rejoice. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Shout salvation full and free. Highest hills and deepest caves. This our song of victory. Jesus saves, Jesus saves.
You may be seated. Maybe. Uh-oh. Somebody fell. Somebody do me a favor and run down to our Filipino ministry. We got like literally a room full of doctors and nurses sitting down there. Really a good idea. You got that, Carla? Okay, thank you. Everybody else, just grab a seat. We don't want to crowd there. Brother Joe, can you play some of the music we've got going on up there, just because? stuff. Just take a second and pray. Just stay here for just a moment. Emergency personnel are on their way. We'll get her taken care of. Ambulance is on their way. Exodus chapter 14. I found one thing: you do not argue with old people. Doesn't matter where they're at. Exodus chapter 14. We've got, I think, 10 or 11 pages of notes we're going to cover in Sunday school this morning. Yeah, that ain't going to happen, is it? Exodus chapter 14. Pastor last week finished up Exodus 13. And if you remember, go back to Exodus 13. Look at verse 18 with me real quickly. But God led the people out, or led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. Pastor broke down what that means, that idea of harness. They went out by rank and by file. They went out in order, okay? Order of importance. In Israel specifically, they were of a patriarchal society. Men were the most important. Women were after that. Kids were basically property, just being honest. And even in that, you were ranked according to your birthright, how old you were. If you were the firstborn, like I am, I would have been first. So dad would have gone, then me, then my sisters and their family. So it would have broken down by age group. So this idea, this harnessed, they're coming out here. And the reason I wanted you to look at this particular verse is at the very beginning. It says, through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. There's a lot of debate on how that works as far as the Red Sea. There are some Bible scholars that try to argue that that is actually mistranslated as the Reed Sea. When's the last time, first off, you saw a sea of reeds? Now, there is a section, there is a specific lake, actually, just north of the Red Sea, in what is now modern-day Saudi Arabia, that at the time would have been considered part of Egypt, that is covered in reeds. But you can't pass a boat through it. It's at its deepest about 6 feet deep, which would have made it really difficult for an entire Egyptian army to drown. Okay, that wouldn't have worked very well. So we're talking, this particular book is 3,500 years old, and it's been translated as Red Sea for 3,500 years. We're going to keep it that way, okay? Exodus chapter 14. Jump down there with me. You gentlemen do whatever you need to do. Just let us know if I'll shut up at any moment. I promise. Exodus chapter 14. Look at verses 1 through 4 with me here. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon. Before it shall ye encamp by the sea. And let's pause here. This particular verse, verse 2, gives us an idea of exactly where these guys were going. Remember, they left from Ramses, went to Sukkoth, in the land of Goshen, two of the treasure cities. We talked about how they basically plundered those treasure cities because the Egyptians gave them everything that they wanted. Then they left, and God tells Moses to lead them here. By the way, this was backwards. According to every instance, if you look through chapters 12 through 14, they'd left. This was actually coming back and doing a weird loop through the desert. He's sending a signal to Pharaoh, hey, these people have no idea what they're doing. Here's the problem, and that's why one of the big reasons I mentioned that idea of the Reed Sea earlier, we don't know where most of these places are. The Red Sea, if you look at it, actually splits up along the Saudi Arabian Peninsula on both sides, splits right up both sides of it. One of those has been completely dug out and is now what we call the Suez Canal. So a huge number of places that may have existed in Bible times don't exist anymore. They've been dug out. There are places, from what I could research over the last week, there are at least 5 different places that are considered this Pi-hahiroth by different scholars of different studies, and they're all somewhere between 400 and 500 miles apart from each other. So the differences between them is drastic. And there's no evidence that any of them line up. There was a guy in the late 70s, early 80s, a guy named, he went by Dr. Ron Wyatt. You may have heard the name. Supposedly he was the one that found evidence of Noah's Ark about 100 miles from where Noah's Ark was supposed to have landed in the Bible and all this stuff. Well, the guy claimed he found all these Egyptian artifacts at the bottom of the Red Sea. Come to find out, he wasn't a doctor. In fact, he was a nurse anesthetist part-time at a hospital and was a part-time amateur archaeologist, and every scrap of his work has been discredited as fake, which is kind of a bummer because a whole bunch of Christians were like, look, they found proof, and he lied. So, hate to throw that out at you. We don't entirely know where this took place. That comes from by the way the secular world. They'll even tell you, these places, we're not sure they exist as they did because of the fact that that entire region changed so drastically with the building of the Suez Canal. Are we okay so far? Not discrediting the Bible. Just telling you, people that tell you they've got proof what happened here, most of the time they probably don't. Just moving on here. Verse 3. For Pharaoh will save the children of Israel. They are entangled in the land. The wilderness hath shut them in. So Pharaoh's got this idea, okay, look at this. They're looping around. He's obviously keeping tabs on them. They plundered 2 of his treasure cities. He wants to know where all his gold went. He's keeping tabs on, and plus there's 2.5+ million people. It's not hard to keep tabs on an entire crowd of human beings on a flat desert. So he's keeping an eye. Hey, the wilderness has shut them in. They don't know what they're doing here. Look at verse 4. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them, and I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So God tells Moses here, this is what I want you to do. Pharaoh's coming after you one more time. And if you look at this one, verse 4 again, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart. We already talked about God hardening Pharaoh's heart. He didn't change Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh already had issues. He had issues with God. He had issues with God's people. He's just allowing it to go to an extreme to where Pharaoh's going to try one more time. one more time here. Verse 5. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people. And that's an interesting note. If you go back into chapters 10 and 11, we were clearly seeing that about half of Pharaoh's people had decided what was happening with the Israelites, and their God was real. They had believed. We're clearly told that. So now, what's remnant, what's left, it's not just Pharaoh that wants to go after him. It says, and of his servants. So if you look, again, the last couple of plagues, even Pharaoh's people, his servants are saying, no. You need to back off. Let these people go. Going into plagues 9 and 10, they were against Pharaoh's actions. Now they're all for it. So it's not just Pharaoh. His army, his people are backing him again. Let's go get our stuff back. Let's go get our workers back. Okay? Jump into, still in verse 5 here. And they said, why have we done this, that we let Israel go from serving us? Why in the world did we do this? Well, let's go back to the previous 10 terrible things that happened to you. That's a really solid reason. But they decided to keep going here. And he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over every one of them. And let's pause here for just a second. Most of us think of chariots as the old Ben-Hur movie. Okay, you think that. Okay, because that's, for a lot of us, that was our first introduction to what we would consider somewhat accurate chariot. Those were accurate to the Roman Colosseum, where they actually raced those things. Most chariots were the size of modern-day SUVs. They held 4 to 8 people. They had large armored sides, usually had 1 to 2 people leading a team of 8 to 10 horses. We're talking old school stagecoach type idea. We got that concept down. And it would have sometimes 2 to 4, sometimes up to 6 archers angled in all different directions. And usually somebody near the back feeding arrows to these guys. You gotta hate that job. You're just literally sitting on the floor of a chariot handing arrows, hoping, I hope I don't die, I hope I don't die, I hope I don't die. And he gets 600 of these. So if we're talking at minimum about 4 people per chariot here, he's got an army of 2,400 trained soldiers just here. That's not counting any infantry. And a chariot's going to be able to move a lot faster than your average infantry. He's coming in hot and heavy, and he's got more armament than they've got. If you pay attention through going into the later books here that Moses wrote and then Joshua, these guys didn't have much as far as weaponry went. They had a lot of gold at this point, but they did not have much as far as weaponry went. So they're in for it. Now, 2,500 versus 2.5 million. We're not talking a big number. We're not, but you realize over a third of Pharaoh's people are dead. He doesn't have much left. He's going in with everything he's got, and unfortunately, it wasn't going to be enough even on his best days. Let's keep jumping down here, though. Verse 8, and the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with an high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army. So that's where we get the idea that he doesn't just have, if you will, a cavalry with the chariots here. He's also got his full army coming, and overtook them encamping by the sea, beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-zephon. So the Pharaoh's army gets there. By the way, it shouldn't have taken long. Based on any estimate of where this Pi-hahiroth actually is, it should have been no more than about a week and a half long journey for the Israelites at 2.5 million people. You go into an army in full gear, battle ready, they're going to get there in about 3 to 5 days max. And God told them, if you go back and camp by the sea, you're hanging out here. God, made Israel sitting ducks. Again, they don't have much in the way of weaponry. They've got a mountain on one side. Migdol is considered a mountain by almost all accounts. And you've got an ocean over here, or a sea. They've got nowhere to go. Just to compare it to something that part of more modern history you might recognize, this is the Battle of Yorktown at the tail end of the Revolutionary War, where we backed the British Army into a peninsula where they had nowhere to go. That's where Israel's at. This is Israel's version of Yorktown. They are stuck, and Pharaoh's here. So what does God do? Look at verse 10. When Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. That is a very valid response to seeing the army of the people you just stole all their stuff from. Right? I mean, they saw all the plagues happen. The first 3 affected the Israelites. The last 7 did not. So they saw everything that was going on. They took all this stuff. They're laden with huge amounts of treasure. If you go into what happens near the end of the book of Exodus, Pastor's going to get into it when they're building the tabernacle. The only reason they add the materials to build everything in the tabernacle is because they stole it all from the Egyptians. And now he's coming back with his army, and they have all his stuff. Sore afraid is a very accurate thought here, okay? Sometimes we think of these Bible characters, like especially Peter walks on the water, sees the winds and the waves, sore afraid. Oh, I wouldn't have been afraid. You're an idiot. You're standing on water in a storm, and you're not afraid? You are a liar and an idiot. Come on. So these people are so afraid, and keep going. It says, and the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. Mark, if you're in the habit of marking in your Bible, mark that one. That's the first time since Moses showed up that the children of Israel actually called unto God themselves. Everything else, it was either Moses' fault or they went to Moses first. They cried out to God themselves. You realize, though, that prior to Moses showing back up into Israel, God hadn't spoken to them in 430 years. And now they've just seen everything God's done, and for the first time in centuries as a people, they realize they can talk to God themselves. This is a pretty amazing moment, which, by the way, starts becoming a regular moment. Sadly for these people, for the next 40 years, it usually becomes a complaining moment. But mark that in your Bible. It's one of the first times in about 400 some odd years that they called out to God themselves. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Always been bothered by that phrase. Because there were no graves in Egypt. At this time, the Egyptians were just starting to master their mummification process. They usually started that by burying the bodies in sand for upwards of 3 weeks. Sand is, especially in the Sahara, as hot as it is, 120 degrees, almost no humidity. It's what's called a desiccant. It literally absorbs moisture, sucks it out of the body, so it dries the skin, which is why some of those pharaohs, some of those mummies, are still in such oddly amazing condition as they are today. They would start there. All of Egypt was centered on the Nile River, and about 15 miles past the edge of the Nile is Sahara Desert. How were there no graves in Egypt? They could have just thrown you in the river like they did the baby boys back when Moses was born, fed you to the crocodiles. That's a nice grave. They don't have to worry about your bones. They're gone. They could have thrown you in the desert where you would have died and nobody would have ever seen you again because you would have been covered with a sand dune within about 12 hours. It's a dumb phrase. It doesn't make any sense because they're speaking in hyperbole. Hyperbole, that's a lovely grammatical term that means they're over-exaggerating things. My mom used to use the term speaking evangelistically. You ever have an evangelist come in and they tell you a story? I was out witnessing and over 900 people got saved in the barber shop. What? Where do you get your hair cut? In a factory? My mom always accused me, by the way, of speaking evangelistically, so you never know what you're going to get. Just kidding. Kind of. They're speaking in hyperbole. There were no graves, so you took us out here to die. First off, do you realize how nasty that would have been if all those people died right there? That would have smelled awful, and there would have been evidence of it at this point. Keep going here. Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? By the way, they're not saying any of this to God. They cried unto God, and now they're saying all of this. Look at the first part of verse 11. They're saying this to Moses. It's your fault. we're going to die and that's your fault. No, you're going to die because you're human. Everybody dies. But they're blaming everything here on Moses. Keep going, verse 12. Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. Didn't we tell you it'd be better for us to just be slaves forever than to die out here in the middle of nowhere? By the way, they never said that. Read through your Bible. When we get at our most upset, we say stuff we probably shouldn't. We usually end up blaming people we probably shouldn't. We usually get mad. My dad, the surgery he had on Tuesday when they removed the neuroma, they went in thinking it was going to be about a 4-hour surgery, so they gave him enough anesthesia for a 4-hour surgery. It was about an hour and a half. And he hadn't slept well in about 4 days. And his body did not want to wake up. He was the grumpiest I have ever seen him. I told you on Wednesday, it was kind of hilarious because my dad's normally, if he gets grumpy, it's real quiet grumpy where he just doesn't talk. But he was just blurting stuff out. He was mad at everybody. And I thought it was kind of funny personally. I mean, I felt bad for him because you could tell he was in pain, but he was mad at everybody. When we're in pain, when we're hurting, we tend to say things we wouldn't normally. They're sore afraid. So who do they go to? The man in charge, and all this is your fault. We said all this stuff in the past, even though they didn't. What it was is, well, I said it in my head in the conversation I had in the shower by myself that I won. Remember that? No? I do. That's exactly, and I'm saying all this because you know how this works with us. These people are us. We just live in a different century than them. People are people no matter where you go. It doesn't matter the culture. It doesn't matter the language. People are people, and unfortunately, people are petty. And that includes all of us. And that's exactly what they're doing here. They're getting petty with Moses because they're now afraid. They forgot that 2 to 3 weeks before, God cleared them from 430 years of slavery and made them rich beyond their wildest dreams. In fact, some of these people may have been wearing the gold and the clothes they stole from their neighbors, telling Moses, it's your fault that I'm rich. It's your fault. If any of you want to make me rich, I will blame you as much as you want. I would appreciate it very much. Okay, let's keep moving here, though. Psalm chapter 106. Psalm chapter 106. Turn there very quickly. The psalmist here gives us a few details going into and talking about this particular situation that are at least intriguing here. Psalm chapter 106, look at verse 7 once you get there. Verse 7. Our fathers understood not thy wonders in Egypt. They remembered not the multitude of thy mercies, but provoked him at the sea, even at the Red Sea. Nevertheless, he saved them for his name's sake, that he might make his mighty power to be known. He rebuked the Red Sea also, and it was dried up. So he led them through the depths as through the wilderness. And he saved them from the hand of him that hated them, and redeemed them from the hand of the enemy. And the waters covered their enemies. There was not one of them left. Then believed they his words. They sang his praise. And then verse 13. They soon forgot his works. They waited not for his counsel. How us is that? God does something amazing. Oh, look what God did. 3 days later, we forget all about it. I hate to bring this up like this, but Tuesday night going into Wednesday, most of us were kind of on a high, finding out that they were able to get Pastor's situation under control with a surgery that didn't require another amputation. I've had people complain to me that they had to do another amputation. Still God. He's still got it under control. He's still good. Don't forget. That verse, mark that, verse 13, they soon forgot his works. I'd encourage you to make sure, pray that. God, don't let me forget. God, don't let me forget. By the way, that might need to be a daily little thrown in part of your prayer life. God, don't let me forget everything you've done for me. God, don't let me forget. I grew up in church. But because of how I grew up, I don't have a testimony of somebody who's jacked up and scarred up. I don't have that. So God, thank you for not letting me go through that. Don't let me forget. that I've had a very blessed life. Because the Bible still says, to whom much is given, much shall be required. God, don't let me forget that. Go to Psalm 46. Should be back a few pages from where you're at. Psalm chapter 46. Psalmist here doesn't specifically address the Red Sea, the crossing here. It's a good reminder, though. Psalm chapter 46, look at verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. Selah. God is our refuge and strength, and it's the last half of this verse that just, I think, is the most momentous of all of it, a very present help. He's not here late. He's never here early. He's very present. Which, by the way, if you study that out in its context, means he's always here. He's always there. He's always here. Back of the room when we had our issue this morning. He's going to be with Miss Daggett as she's going to the hospital. Always very present. Don't forget that. Tie that in with Psalm 106:13. God, I don't want to forget. You're always here. You have those two tied together. You'll never run into an issue that the Israelites have sitting here. They've just watched God do miracle after miracle after miracle. And by the way, I use the term miracle because that's exactly what they are. Even though they were grotesque and hideous and caused massive amounts of death, it's still a miracle. God did something supernatural. They watched that over and over and over again. They got 430 years worth of back pay in one night. They're dripping in gold. They have carts filled with this stuff. And they're sitting there, we're going to die, and it's your fault. They forgot. Could you I visualize things. I just visualize some guy about my age whining to his mom while adjusting his brand new gold chain with a giant scarab beetle made out of emeralds on it. I can't believe what Moses did. We're going to die here. And oh man, this thing's heavy. Slap that kid. But think about it. We do the same thing sometimes. God gets us through this huge trial, this huge problem, and we forget, oh, that's right, I need God even when it's a good day. We kind of always think of this last part of verse 1 of Psalm 46, very present help in trouble. It could be a very present help in sunny weather, in good days, in awesome days. He's always there. Just something to think about. Jump back to Exodus chapter 14. We're almost finished. Exodus chapter 14. We're almost finished for today. Not even close to almost finished with my notes. Not even close. Okay? I knew it wasn't going to happen. I was on a roll yesterday, so I just finished the whole chapter. It might take me a month to get through it, but Exodus chapter 14. I'm kidding on that. A couple of you are like, oh no. Exodus chapter 14, look at verse 13. And Moses said unto the people, fear ye not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord. Possibly one of the most famous phrases in the Old Testament because Moses wrote it, and then if you read through the book of Psalms, David repeated that a lot. That concept of no fear, stand still, see the salvation of the Lord. Maybe not in that exact wording. In some cases it was, but that concept, stand still. Pastor's been using the phrase the last week or so that God's got this. That's a paraphrase from this verse. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. God's got it. You don't have to do anything. Literally, just stand there and watch what God's going to do for you. The Christian life isn't us proving how Christian we are. The Christian life is us saying, God, help me do stuff for you. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians, whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. Again, if you're in the habit of marking and you take notes, that is a very important phrase right there at the very end of verse 13. Ye shall see them again no more forever. This is the last recorded day that the entire nation of Israel was directly connected with the Pharaoh. Last time. Now, there were Israelites who went back and forth to Egypt. Joseph, the stepfather of Jesus, Joseph, Mary, baby Jesus, they fled to Egypt. So there were Israelites in and out of Egypt. I'm not saying individuals. As a national whole, this was the last time they were in direct contact with Pharaoh. Moses made a statement and God kept his word. Okay? Verse 14, the Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. I think this is my favorite verse in this entire story. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. You're not doing anything. God's got all of this. You realize that the crossing of the Red Sea, they could not have accomplished it by boat. Not physically possible. Number one, there weren't enough trees in any of the potential areas where the Red Sea crossing happened. There weren't enough trees to build enough boats or barges to get 2.5 million people across in one night. Not even close. No potential for that. We're talking this would have been a huge amount of animals and people and now stuff that they've accumulated from the Egyptians. They're not swimming this stuff across. When's the last time you saw a herd of cows swim across the sea? I know it's a really ridiculous thing to think about, but it doesn't happen. That's why I brought it up. God did something here, and all these people had to do was just stand there and watch. Which, by the way, could you imagine being there, standing there, and watching that? That would have been cool. I don't know. Heaven, I think we're going to be so overwhelmed with the presence of God that we're going to forget everything that we experienced before just because of who and what he is. But I would love for him to replay some of this stuff in history. You know, we have 3D now. I don't know what God's got, 6, 8D, you know, surround sound, like just plugs you in and you're there. I want to know. Could you imagine all this complaining, and then shortly after this, boom, wind kicks up, and Could you imagine being the ones that made the biggest stink, the biggest noise, the biggest complaint, and you're like, oh, crud. Because then it just takes away he took away every excuse they ever had for not believing him. Which he'd already done the previous several weeks with taking care of them, all the plagues, all the miracles he did. They shouldn't have had any issue here. They should have just been like, God, what you going to do this time? Think about it. That should have been their reaction. Ooh, what's he going to do now? Like real excited. Ooh. I wonder what's going to happen. Instead, they're like, ah! Stand still. This required zero work on the Israelites' part. Zero. By the way, Moses lifting his hand was just show. God didn't need Moses' rod to do anything. He never did. Keep going here. Verse 18. I got a couple minutes left. And the Lord said unto Moses, wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. But lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And I will get me honor upon Pharaoh and upon all his hosts, upon his chariots and upon his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. So God makes some bold statements in here with Moses. And the one I think is probably the most intriguing is in verse 15. Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. Keep moving forward. Even if it seems impassable, they're standing in front of a sea with one of the most well-outfitted armies in the world behind them. Keep moving forward. Keep moving forward. And then at the very end here, verses 17 and 18, because God's taking care of the enemy. God's taking care of the enemy. I've been doing a lot of running. I've talked about it excessively, and I apologize for that. It's just something I'm doing right now. I use an app made by Nike, the Nike shoe company. It's called the Nike Run Club. And in a few of those, they have what are called guided apps, or guided runs, where they actually have like a coach that talks through your head. Well, one of them was possibly one of the most famous women runners in American history. I think it's Joni Bernal Samuelson. She ran and won the very first Olympic women's marathon in 1984. She had arthroscopic surgery on one of her knees 2 weeks before the Olympics and still won and set a world record time. This lady's amazing. The first time she'd ever run 26.2 miles, which is a marathon, was the Boston Marathon, and she won. She didn't even know the trail. Like Heartbreak Hill, all those crazy things we read about. She didn't know that was part of the trail. She didn't know it, and she won and set a world record time. This lady's mind-blowing. And she made a statement, I've bragged for years, and I make a personal effort. I never look back when I run. Because it doesn't matter who's behind me. It just matters the trail in front of me. I did that run shortly after I finished the study yesterday, and I'm sitting there thinking, holy cow, she basically quoted Bible, and she didn't even know it. Make sure the Israelites go forward, because verse 17 and 18, I got the enemy. You don't got to worry about what's behind you. We're going to end on that note today. We're not going to actually talk about them crossing the Red Sea, because you got to come back next week for all that stuff. Here's the cool part. I'll tell you this. Science proves that the crossing of the Red Sea is possible. And we're talking modern science. As of February 2018, modern science. A bunch of you are going to try to Google that. Don't do it during the next church service. Wait till you get home. We're going to pray, and we'll get out of here. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Lord, thank you for allowing us to be here. Lord, I'm asking you to bless Mrs. Daggett this morning. Lord, give the doctors, the nurses, whoever's taking care of her, the wisdom. Lord, help there to be no major permanent problems. Lord, just thank you for the quick response we had with them this morning. Thank you for those here in the room that were able to jump and help her there. Lord, bless Pastor this morning. I know he's been in a lot of pain. Give the doctors wisdom. I know he's meeting with a couple of them this morning, Lord, and just help him as he recovers and goes back onto this journey of relearning to walk and new prosthetic and the whole 9 yards, Lord. Just bless him. Bless the services we have today. Keep us safe throughout the building. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Service starts at about 11 o'clock. You're dismissed.